The crowd stopped breathing. Even the referee froze. In that frozen second, before impact, before sound, the entire room held its collective exhale. Time collapsed. Nothing moved. Nothing dared to move. This moment, this exact moment, would change everything. Bangkok, 1971. The stadium was packed. Not thousands. That part was kept quiet. But the ones who were there, they knew. The air had electricity, the kind that comes before lightning strikes. James Thunderfist Morrison arrived confident. 6'3", 245 pounds of American heavyweight pride. He trained in California under some of the biggest names in boxing, sparred with champions, won tournament fights. The man had credentials. More importantly, he had size. And in 1971, everyone still believed that size was destiny. He didn't know who he was about to face. The organizers didn't advertise it. No promotional posters. No press conferences screaming about the Battle of the Titans. This wasn't supposed to be public. This wasn't supposed to be witnessed. But word had spread through underground circles. Fighters knew. Coaches knew. 8 people, maybe 9, found their way into that private gymnasium.
Someone laughed nervously. Bruce didn't react, didn't look up, didn't defend himself with words. He was taping his hands with the precision of someone performing a ritual, each rap deliberate, each layer measured, no wasted movements, no wasted breath. This was the contrast that terrified people. Not aggression, not anger, preparation. Morrison was talking. Bruce was becoming. They took their positions. No ropes, no official ring, just the gymnasium floor and 8 pairs of eyes that suddenly understood they were about to witness something they could never fully explain to anyone else. The referee, someone's friend who'd volunteered, explained basic safety rules, nothing too formal, nothing that could be documented. Morrison rolled his shoulders, bounced on his toes, the heavyweight rhythm, the rhythm of men who'd spent years being told their weight was the answer to every question. Bruce assumed his stance, feet closer together than boxing taught, hands higher, knees bent in a way that looked almost fragile until you understood it meant explosive power was coiled in every fiber. They locked eyes. That's when Morrison saw it, not the physical size, not the visible threat, but something in Bruce's eyes that said, "You are about to learn something you cannot unlearn." "Are we sparring or fighting?" Morrison asked nervously. "Sparring," Bruce said quietly. Then he smiled. The referee raised his hand, dropped it. Morrison moved first, a classic heavyweight opening, a broad jab meant to establish distance and control the range. His hand moved at normal speed, normal human speed. Bruce's hand met it halfway. But that wasn't what the 8 people remembered. They remembered what didn't happen. Morrison's fist didn't land, didn't even come close. It was redirected, not slapped away, but guided as if his own momentum was the only force acting on it. Morrison blinked.
He tried again. A left hook this time. Committed weight, real power behind it. The kind of punch that usually ended sparring sessions. Bruce slipped it, without moving his feet. The punch passed 3 inches from his ear. Morrison felt the air pressure, felt how close and how far his strike really was. Morrison stepped back, raised his hands. This was now serious. He came forward with a combination: jab, cross, hook. Boxing fundamentals, the curriculum taught in every gym in America. Bruce moved like water, backward, sideways, rolling under. But it wasn't frantic. It wasn't defensive desperation. Every movement was economic. Every step was placed with a purpose that extended 3 decisions ahead. Then Bruce moved forward. That's when everyone in the room stopped breathing.
Then 6. Then 7. At 8, he sat up slowly, checking his face, checking if his nose was still attached, checking if this was real or some shared hallucination that everyone in the room was experiencing together. Bruce stood where he'd thrown the punch, hands down, breathing normally, not even elevated, like he'd just walked to the grocery store instead of rewiring someone's entire understanding of physics. "You okay?" Bruce asked. Morrison didn't answer. Couldn't answer. His body was still processing what had happened. The referee rushed over. They helped Morrison to his feet. Again, the referee asked. Morrison shook his head. The kind of head shake that says, "I am not ready for this." The kind that says, "I don't think my brain is equipped to process what I just experienced." The others in the room stayed silent. One of them, a boxing coach from California who'd come to assess the local talent, walked over to the wall and leaned against it. Not casually, but like he needed the wall to help him process the fact that his entire career, built on teaching men how to use size and weight as advantage, had just been disproven by a man who weighed 110 pounds less. A young fighter in the corner whispered something to the coach next to him. "Did you see that?" the young fighter asked. "No," the coach answered. "I didn't see that. I saw the result, but I didn't see the actual motion. It was too fast." That's how you knew. When the punch was so fast that your eyes registered the...
Through the quiet networks of people who actually understood fighting. He hit him so fast the dude didn't even see it coming. One punch ended it. Boxers are different than martial artists. This proved that. The rumors evolved, as rumors do. Some said Morrison threw 10 punches. Some said it was a real fight, not sparring. Some said Morrison was hospitalized. Some said his face was never the same. The truth was simpler and more devastating. One punch, faster than a heavyweight champion's reflexes. Perfect technique meeting zero defense. Only 8 people truly knew what happened. And Bruce Lee never talked about it. That was the other thing that people remembered. His silence afterward. No boasting, no YouTube clips. This was 1971. YouTube didn't exist. But even if it had, Bruce wouldn't have posted it. No public statements. He'd simply proven what he believed, and then he moved on to the next thing. Because for Bruce Lee, speed wasn't about proving strength. It wasn't about humiliation or domination. It was about truth. The world in 1971 didn't have a...
Morrison left Thailand 3 days later. He didn't tell anyone the full story, not officially. He couldn't. The defeat, if you could even call it that, wasn't supposed to exist. It was a private sparring session, unofficial, undocumented. The kind of thing that happened in gyms when egos collided, and only the people in the room knew what was real. But Morrison knew. He knew it every time he looked in the mirror and saw the shadow of bruising under his eye. He knew it when other fighters asked about his trip and he changed the subject too quickly. He knew it in the way his confidence had been recalibrated by a force that his entire training methodology hadn't prepared him to face. The 8 witnesses dispersed across the globe, carrying that moment with them like a secret. One of them, the California boxing coach, returned to the States and did something unusual. He didn't tell anyone what he'd seen. He watched. He studied Bruce Lee's films. He analyzed the techniques. He began to understand that what had happened in Bangkok wasn't an anomaly. It was proof of concept. Bruce Lee wasn't just a martial artist who trained differently. He was a martial artist who'd solved the equation that everyone else had gotten wrong. Here's what fighters had believed for centuries. Bigger man wins. It was simple. It was testable. It was backed by literally thousands of years of combat history. The bigger the man, the harder the punch. The heavier the weight, the more momentum. The more muscle, the more force. It was physics. It was evolution. It was fate. Bruce Lee looked at this equation and asked the one question that broke it open. What if speed was the variable that mattered more than size? Not strength, not mass, speed. A punch travels at 25 miles per hour when thrown by an average heavyweight, A world-class heavyweight might get to 35 miles per hour. With perfect technique, the very best might touch 45 miles per hour. Bruce Lee threw punches that witnesses couldn't see. Not metaphorically, literally couldn't track with their eyes. The punch arrived before their nervous system could register the motion that created it. That meant speed was exceeding their perceptual threshold, potentially 60, 70, maybe even 80 plus miles per hour. And Morrison had learned this fact the hard way. Bruce Lee wasn't trying to prove strength.
He tried again. A left hook this time. Committed weight, real power behind it. The kind of punch that usually ended sparring sessions. Bruce slipped it without moving his feet. The punch passed 3 inches from his ear. Morrison felt the air pressure, felt how close and how far his strike really was. Morrison stepped back, raised his hands. This was now serious. He came forward with a combination: jab, cross, hook. Boxing fundamentals, the curriculum taught in every gym in America. Bruce moved like water, backward, sideways, rolling under. But it wasn't frantic. It wasn't defensive desperation. Every movement was economic. Every step was placed with a purpose that extended 3 decisions ahead. Then Bruce moved forward. That's when everyone in the room stopped breathing. The message was clear. The era of size as destiny was ending. The 8 people in that gymnasium understood something most of the world didn't yet grasp. They understood that they just watched the future arrive. They understood that Bruce Lee wasn't just another martial artist building a film career. He was a scientist, a visionary, a man who was solving ancient problems through modern biomechanical understanding. One of the witnesses, a young Thai fighter who'd studied American boxing, walked out of that gym and spent the next decade analyzing what he'd seen. He started incorporating Bruce's principles into his own training. Speed before strength. Efficiency before mass. The result? He became one of the most feared fighters in Southeast Asia. Not because he got bigger, not because he trained harder by conventional standards, but because he trained smarter. Another witness, a Hong Kong film producer who'd been evaluating talent, saw the Morrison incident and thought, this is a movie star. Not because of looks, not because of charisma, though Bruce had both, but because he just watched a man perform something that seemed physically impossible. And if it was on film, if it was captured for a global audience, it would change how the world understood human potential. That producer would become instrumental in launching Bruce's film career, the career that would eventually make him a global icon. The others carried the memory silently, but they carried it. What happened in that Motivon Bangkok gymnasium in 1971 created a ripple that spread far beyond martial arts. In boxing gyms, coaches started asking different questions. What if we're wrong about size? What if the future of fighting isn't about getting bigger, but about getting faster? In gyms across the United States, a new philosophy began to germinate. Guys who were smaller than their opponents started experimenting with speed-based techniques, started training with video slow-motion analysis, started measuring punch velocity instead of just throwing heavy bags. The heavyweight division itself would eventually be transformed, not overnight, but through a gradual realization that the best fighters balanced power and speed, not power or speed. Bruce Lee had forced the entire world of combat sports to reconsider its assumptions.
One punch in a private gymnasium had proven what years of philosophy couldn't. Speed changes everything. Morrison never pressed charges, never went to the press, never tried to reclaim honor or challenge Bruce to an official fight. Because Morrison had learned something in that 0.8 seconds that all the boxing training in America couldn't teach him. There are levels to this. The 8 witnesses never released footage. There wasn't any. They never went on record, officially. They just carried the memory forward, the memory of impossibility becoming possible. And in an era before the internet, before YouTube, before viral videos and social media verification, that memory became legend. It became the story that boxers whispered about, the story that proved speed could defeat size, the story that justified a small Asian man becoming a global film icon. Because the Morrison incident was real in a way that rumors about Ali never could be. It was testified to by 8 people who trained their entire lives to understand fighting. It was the one data point that couldn't be dismissed as mythology or exaggeration or Hollywood legend-making. In his later years, Bruce Lee would write extensively about what he'd discovered. He called it the philosophy of no way as way. Remove the ego. Remove the assumptions about how things should work. See the opponent as they actually are. See yourself as you actually are. Then find the most efficient path to victory. Morrison represented the old way. Big man fights small man. Big man wins. Done. Bruce represented the new way. Fast man fights slow man. Fast man wins. But faster isn't about who's naturally gifted. It's about who's trained smarter. This philosophy would transform not just martial arts, but also every discipline it touched. Combat sports, obviously, but also dance, athletics, even surgical technique. The principle was universal. Efficiency beats effort. Speed beats size. Intelligence beats assumption. Bruce Lee hadn't just proven this against Morrison in a private gymnasium. He'd proven it in a way that no one could deny. 50 years later, Morrison was probably still living, probably still carrying the memory of that punch, even if he never spoke about it publicly. The 8 witnesses were scattered across the world, most of them elderly now, carrying a story that they could never fully prove to anyone who hadn't experienced it.
But the ripples kept spreading. In modern MMA, in boxing, in every combat sport, the principle that Bruce Lee demonstrated was now orthodoxy. Speed and technique beat size. It wasn't debatable anymore. It wasn't controversial. It was just true. Every fighter who trained to move efficiently instead of just building mass, every coach who emphasized footwork over heavy lifting, every athlete who understood that explosiveness came from explosiveness coming from perfect technique rather than raw power, they were all living downstream from that moment in Bangkok. Bruce Lee had solved a riddle that had puzzled warriors for thousands of years. He'd proven it with one punch. And the world, slowly, grudgingly, but inevitably, had no choice but to accept it. The story about Muhammad Ali might be legend. The Morrison incident was history. It was the moment when philosophy became flesh, when theory became action, when a small man proved beyond any doubt that the future belonged to the fast, the smart, and the relentless, not the big, the heavy, and the tired. Only 8 people witnessed it, and none of them ever forgot what they saw. Because once you've seen the future arrive, once you've watched the old world die in real time,